And welcome again to Cottage Talk. I am Russ Goldman. Joining me right now is Paul from the podcast Whole Lotta Wolves. He's on to help us preview this upcoming match on Friday at Craven Cottage between Fulham and Wolverhampton Wanderers. Before we go on any further, I do want to welcome Paul to the show. Paul, welcome to Cottage Talk. First of all, I just want to say this, that I love the opening to your show, and I love the title of your podcast.
Yeah, so that's the influence of probably our most famous fan, Mr. Robert Plant of Led Zeppelin fame. So we've not yet managed to grab him as a guest, but we're working on it. We'll keep going.
Well, I hope you do get Robert Plant on. That would be fantastic. But what's interesting is I did listen to your podcast. It's a great podcast. I do recommend Fulham supporters listening to Whole Lotta Wolves. I would highly recommend it. Give them a follow as well. So, Paul, for the next half hour, we're going to break down this match, but we're also going to get really a perspective on what's been going on with Wolves from you. And then we'll, in the second half of this show, really get down to the nitty and gritty and talking about this match. But before we do that, let's just get you going by just give me just an overview on the season so far for Wolves. I'm actually surprised where Wolves are right now. At the beginning of the season, I just expected them to be in the top 10. I'm not going to lie to you. So I'm a little bit surprised. What are your thoughts about the season?
Our season, really, the narrative goes back to pre-season, actually, that we had a good season last year and tailed off massively, though, towards the end. So at one stage, we were really aiming for that European position. We were one game within the top four at one point when we were riding at a real high. It was roughly around about this time into the spring of last season, it started to go downhill, and no one could really put their finger on it. Same players, same setup and everything. And the coach, Bruno Lage, kind of got the benefit of the doubt that he'd had a pretty good season. There'd not been a ton of expenditure in terms of the playing personnel. So the thought was, well, if he could do that with the squad that he got, what could he do with some extra players and bulking up that squad a little? So that's what we saw in the summer to a certain extent, that it seemed to be that the checkbook was open again, and we had new players coming in, but it was a change of formation. Some of those players either didn't settle, like Gonzalo Guedes, from pretty much our record signing. He's already come and gone, back out on loan. The success that's been. Kalajnic, we're crying out for a real focal point of a number 9. We signed him, injured ACL within the first half of his debut. So all of that started to go wrong. It pretty much culminated with the coach getting fired. Coincidentally, at the time, Julian Lopetegui, he'd been at Sevilla, done well.
Right.
He was always he was the name mooted when we got bought out by Fosun. That he was the coach. He was all set to take that position when we were in the Championship, but the Spanish job came calling and he took that. So he's always been a name that's been bubbling under. So the timing-wise, around that time, that it seemed initially that there was too much of an overlap, that wouldn't work out, and then that got extended. We invested longer in a caretaker coach because it became apparent that Lopetegui would be available, and that was after the World Cup. So that couldn't have come at a better time for us, really, in terms of him having that opportunity to have a look at the bulk of the squad over an extended period in a mini pre-season. And from that point on, it's pretty much been a tale of two different seasons. There's a really good table kicking around that collates the teams who were in the bottom of the league and how they've performed post World Cup. I think it goes down to 7 or 8 teams who are in the bottom, and as it stands, we're leading that. So it just shows the turnaround. We've jumped out from the bottom, being the last place, being 20th, into 16th, flirting with 15th a little. It was all looking pretty rosy up until Bournemouth showed up on Saturday and beat us 1-0 out of nowhere. That kind of flew through a curveball against the most recent form. But up to that point, it's been really, really much improved.
What's interesting about this, and I'm not trying to pour salt on any wound, but I am going to bring up two players. One's a Fulham player, one's a former Fulham player. Let's start with Paulinho, because Paulinho was rumored to be going to Wolves. And I actually even tweeted out, I thought it was a done deal. This is this summer. And somehow Fulham I'm going to just give Marco Silva a lot of credit here, because I think he had a serious influence on bringing him to Fulham. But he was exactly what Fulham needed. And I think in a way, maybe it was a domino effect to what happened to Wolves, because what's interesting is that, like I said, I listened to your podcast, and now a very important player, which I was shocked to hear, could be Mario Lemina, a former Fulham player. And it just seemed that without him against Bournemouth, if I'm listening correctly, it really caused this effect where you missed him. It caused players that you would normally be further up the pitch to have to go further back.
Correct.
So it just shows how important that position is, because Paulinho has been integral to everything Fulham have done, Paul. And in a very short period of time, it obviously, based on what I listened to, Lemina has been important to Wolves.
Yeah, Lemina in particular very much came out of the blue in that we were pretty well stocked in midfield, and then his name started kicking around at speculation, and we signed him, and we also signed another central midfielder, João Gomez. He came in, Brazilian. So it was what's the plan with all of these midfielders? We get the impression that some of it is scenario planning, that potentially better centre midfielders won't be here next season moving forwards. But Lemina in particular, I don't think anyone had a very clear idea of what role he would come in and take. And it's been so eye-opening, really, that he could come in and make such a difference and take a position as the real bulldog in that centre of the park that was going around, and he won't give the other midfielders on the opposition any space, quickest to the ball. And that knock-on effect was that it allows Ruben Neves to expand his game and play himself further up the pitch. Whereas when Lemina was out suspended on Saturday and Neves had to revert to that defensive midfielder role, he's a great defensive midfielder, but the opportunities that are presented to him are way fewer than even just playing 5-10 yards higher up the pitch. So it's been a real eye-opener and a surprise that Lemina's come in and made such a difference and can be so acutely missed even after such a short period of time.
Oh, what's interesting, he played very well in a very bad season for Fulham, which is called what it is, when we got relegated once again. But he was actually a bright spot. So it doesn't surprise me that he is playing well for you. Maybe that he's become that integral in such a short period of time. That's a surprise for me. I didn't see that coming, but and I'm glad that he's worked out for Wolves. And best of luck to him and also for your side. So I'm glad it actually has worked out, Paul. All right. So what's interesting about this, because I want to just talk briefly, I like to look back at the last match. Should we basically, it was so long ago, change of manager for you. Fulham are probably a much better team than they were the first time we played. Is there anything we could take out of that first match? Wasn't it back in August? It goes so far back. So can we take anything from that?
I say no, based on the fact that it was such a long time ago with that different coaching setup. And even then at the start of August, I think it was our first home game. When the transfer window is still open until the end of the month, you could be playing a totally different team. Like if you were playing Notts Forest, you could have played a different Notts Forest in August than you would do today, for example. So I think that I think that does factor into it. But I also think that what we're going to be facing on Friday is a team that's become more it has become more of a team, and it's been a surprise in a certain extent that you've done so well this season. But there's a definite dynamic to it. I don't think that was necessarily there at the start of the season. It was forming, but it's not been really until more of these games that have built up, obviously getting the World Cup break over and done with, and moving on from there. I think that's now is really where we're seeing the different levels of teams within the EPL, and richly deserve that Fulham are in the place that they're in.
Well, that's great. You actually beat me to the punch. I was going to ask you your thoughts on Fulham, but I'm glad that you had mentioned this, because if you have not watched Fulham, even if you watched them at the beginning of the season and you're watching them now, the way I'm always asked, well, what is the difference between Fulham? Why are they able to compete with Chelsea? Why are they able to compete with all these sides? And you just nailed it. They play as an 11. They play as a team. And now it really has come all together. Is there a lack of depth? Potentially. Potentially there's a lack of depth. But when you have a team playing all together, even when Mitro can't play, they've found ways to win without him. They did in the last match. But they fight for each other. They play for each other. It truly is a team, Paul. And that's what I've watched. It sounds like that's what you've noticed as well.
Yeah, like the really, apart from Mitrovic and his goals, there's no major superstars, or there's not many Fulham players that often get linked with that big move, which is favourable sometimes because it's a team that can go under the radar. And I'm
Exactly.
quite happy when our players are doing well, yet they're not in the national spotlight, or they're not being handpicked by Chelsea to add to their grossly inflated squad either. So I think that works in a team like Fulham's favour, that you can have that cohesion, but you haven't got those out and out kind of star players that can attract attention. Maybe that can sometimes work negatively, and they get ideas above their station and they're playing for their next move, and instead of the team, it becomes all about them. So I think having that focus and that cohesive unit works pretty well for you guys.
I totally agree, Paul. Thank you for sharing that. Before we really break down this match, just to focus on this a little bit, I was actually on another podcast called the EPL Roundtable, and I was on with a Wolves supporter. And he told me, and tell me your thoughts on this, that your first season back in the Premier League reminds him of Fulham's season this season, meaning that you had this wonderful season, the first season back. And then he said after that, the trick is trying to keep on to all your key players. And slowly but surely, you started to lose some players. And that is the concern moving forward. Would you agree with that?
I would do, definitely. I think it talks to an evolution of a team, which is somewhat tricky for clubs in our status, and I kind of bracket ourselves in that mid-tier of EPL teams, that often we can be the pickings for the bigger teams, and if we're not careful, if our scouting and succession planning isn't correct, you can take a key player out, and it can really jeopardize the team moving forward. And I think one area that we've struggled most recently, and you can take it all the way back, is scoring goals. And at the time, for us, now hindsight's a wonderful thing, but it was losing Diogo Jota to Liverpool, which is that exact scenario we've just mentioned.
Right.
At the time, everyone was like, "Oh, okay, he's a bit streaky, you know." So if we get 40 million for him, we may have a player or two that can come in that costs half of that and do well. And that's never happened. And that knock-on effect in terms of partnerships that he was able to craft, especially with Raul, and then Raul's injury, and he's not come back to the player that he was. That's one that we've seen ourselves that can have such a big knock-on effect. So it's a definite care that our status of clubs have to take in order to protect themselves in seasons to come.
And it's interesting that you say that, because I remember at the time thinking, I was curious what the reaction was from Wolves supporters when Jota went to Liverpool, because I'm thinking, why would they allow this to happen? Was it just the money was too much, Paul, or was it that he just wanted to leave? Was it a combination of both? Why did that move happen? Because I was actually surprised that they let a key player go. I'm talking about Wolves.
Sure. I think it was a combination of those factors, that the money was too good to turn down at the time. I think as a player, if you get interest from a team like Liverpool, you're gonna look into it a little further. So I think the opportunity for him to take that evolution in his career, I think a lot of the players we've talked about already are part of a certain George Mendes stable as well. So that factors into it as well.
Of
And
course, yeah.
he's playing Game of Thrones and moving these pieces around the different stables and houses and what have you, then that factors into it also. And we, in theory, we had a ready-made replacement in Pedro Neto that played on the left and was younger and had done well. But I think a little naively, people thought that he could fill Jota's boots, and that sadly hasn't happened.
Okay, very interesting. And the Mendes factor is now he is involved with Fulham as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. Okay, coming up next to end the show, Paul and I are going to preview the match from both clubs' perspectives. Okay, Paul, let's get to it. So the way I generally do it, I look at the key players for both sides. So give me the key players for Wolves on Friday, and I'll share mine for Fulham.
So I'm going to start somewhat weirdly with a centre-back, and that's Trey Dawson. So he was a player that came in the transfer window, the January window, as someone that they identified that we needed that stability in the back of an older head who had some more ring smarts about him that could really stabilise the back line and strengthen it. And I think what has been more of a foundation of a Lopetegui team is to be more structured and disciplined at the back, and hope to build on that and get your victories with a strong defence to start with. So I think he's an important figure, and it will be interesting. And my questions to you in terms of players he'll be coming up against is, often Mitrovic has run us ragged in the past, or ran certain of our players ragged that aren't here anymore. So if he's fit and he was coming up against Dawson, it would have been important to have Dawson as that wily old centre-back who could probably play him a little better than what we've done previously. So he's important to us. I think Neves is always crucial. Again, that's going to probably dovetail with Lamina. I think if Lamina starts, Neves can play that more forward of the midfielders and take a grip of it that way. But unfortunately for us, that's where the positives start to ebb away somewhat, because goals have certainly been hard to come by. We've not settled on a real fluid lineup in terms of those players taking the attacking positions. I've got no real attacking player to say, guys, you've got to keep a watch out on him, or he's going to cause trouble, because we've not been in that rich strain of form collectively. So on their day, they can all be world beaters, but we've not yet seen that from the attacking players.
Okay, and just keep this in mind, and it would obviously be a positive for Wolves. Alexander Mitrovic is a doubt for this match. We've not had the presser yet from Marco, so I'm not sure about his availability, but I would not be surprised if he does not play in this match based on what I've been hearing. So we'll see. We'll see what happens, and obviously that would help out Wolves. But if I'm even looking at key players for Fulham, I wasn't even going to go to Mitro, because Fulham have now, I wouldn't say figured out how to play without him, but they can manage without him. But I think for me, Paul, it really starts and ends with the midfield engine, the three in the middle. And it will be about Paulinho, Reed, and then, of course, Pereira. That, to me, is where Fulham make their hay. and it sets everything up. So for me, it'll be about those three. And when I do talk about starting 11, it'll be interesting to see what Marco picks for his wingers, because he actually has some choices. So we shall see. But that's the key players I'm going are the midfield three. So right back to you. How does Wolves win this match, my friend?
I think it is winning that midfield battle, because it's not going to be high scoring. We play probably better when teams are coming on to us. And I think away from home at the moment, we're probably a better away team than we are at home, when we have to take the initiative a little bit more. So I could see the way I could see us winning this game is being strong at the back, winning that midfield battle in terms of keeping chance creation down to a minimum, and hoping we get fortunate with an opportunity on the break where we've got the likes of a Traore who can potentially exploit those types of situations, maybe to come away with a sneaky 1-0.
Okay, interesting. It's funny because you kind of read my mind to how Fulham need to win this match. It is the midfield battle, because I think it's going to be a back and forth. I think it could be two sides that are basically just playing off of each other, and it could be a very low scoring match. It could be. It's funny. WhoScored.com's prediction was 0-0. So just keep that in mind. I saw that. I was like, oh, great. But it could be that. And I think it's going to be very tight. For Fulham, it's going to be interesting. Like I said, I'm going to talk about my starting 11 that will predict the match. The decision that Marco's going to go with on the wing, because I expect him to play Willian. Will he play Willian and Solomon and mix and match each side with him, flip-flop them? Or will he go with Bobby Decadovere? It's hard to drop him. So that'll be an interesting little side note to this match, is what does Marco do on the wings? And then, of course, if Mitro doesn't play, does he play Bobby Decadovere up front like he did in the last match? It didn't work. Or does he go with Carlos Vinicius, which I would be in favor of? So a lot's going to, for me, depend on what happens with Alexander Mitrovic, and we probably won't know until an hour before the match. So let's get to it, my friend. Let's go with what you think your manager will do with your starting 11, then I'll share mine.
So there's what I want him to do.
Okay.
And there's what I think he'll do. We, away from home a couple of weeks ago, we played Liverpool away in the Cup, and it was definitely more of a distinct 4-4-1-1.
Okay.
And we gave Liverpool a real good game. We should have won at
I watched that match, by the way. Yeah, so, good game.
We looked a lot more potent in that type of setup than we have in a number of different games, and that was making the pitch wide, using more out and out traditional wingers, and then just having more of a presence up front. I would like to see, with the players that he's got at his disposal, that type of formation, but in the league he's been pretty rigid to his 4-3-3. So I can see the back line. You'll get Sarr in goal, Semedo right back, Dawson, Kilman centre backs. Then potentially it's a toss up really between Hugo Beno and Reinhard Nuri as the left back. Centre midfield, I could see it being Lamina Neves and Mateus Nunes, and then up front, I could probably see him keeping Mateus Cunha as the focal down the middle forward, and then probably I think Sarabia plays and Podence, and that brings Traore out the starting 11 and back to come from the bench. So that's what I think he'll go with.
Okay, excellent. I'm just going to share this comment from Wayne Walden. Wayne says, I've just been told that Mitro will not play against Wolves on Friday night. He did not train with the team. Again, this is just a Fulham supporter. Wayne, I don't know if you're right. Maybe you are, but that's your source. We'll see what ends up happening. I've not heard either way if Mitro is playing, but we're going to have to wait and see on that. So, but I'm going to go with the idea, Paul, that Mitro's not going to play. So I think if he does not play, this is what I think Marco's going to go with. it would be Leno. Your right back will be Kenny Tete. Your left back will be Robinson. Your center back pairing is now settled as Ream and Diop. And then your midfield three will be what they have been, and it'll be Paulinho, Reed, and Pereira. On the left, I do think he's going to go with Willian, and on the right, I believe he will go Bobby Decker-Dover Reed, and I think he'll go back to Carlos Vinicius, who actually scored the match winner against Chelsea. I think that's what he's going to go with a starting 11, and we'll see. We'll see what he ends up doing. That's what I think he's going to do. Okay, my friend, let's end the show with your prediction.
I feel really cheap stealing that 0-0 one, but we're not scoring any goals. We have got some more defensive stability. I won't take that one. I'll definitely take a point and say there won't be a ton of goals in, but I'll go one each.
Okay, very good. All right. I'm tempted to go with the 0-0 because I could see that happening. But I actually think the way Fulham are playing right now, and as we're talking about playing as a team, finding ways to win, and I have a lot of respect for your manager, for your side, for everything to do with Wolverhampton Wanderers. I have a lot of respect. So this is not any disrespect. This is more to do what I think Fulham have been doing lately. And I'm just going to go for a 1-0. I'm going to back my team for a 1-0, but it could very easily be 0-0, or it could be your prediction, Paul, or it could even be you nicking a victory. I think everything's in play, but I'm going to back my team, and I'm going to say 1-0.
Good for you.
Okay, my friend. Listen, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
My pleasure, Russ.
Before we go, please tell everyone how they can find the podcast.
Sure. Whole Lotta Wolves. We're into our third season. It's across all of the main places where you get your podcasts from, and we're active on the socials as well, with particularly on Twitter, which is at WLW Pod, and Facebook. So that is Whole Lot of Wolves. It's exclusively an American flavored podcast. I'm an expat here in Houston. Co-host is also here in Houston.
Yep.
Our producer is in New York, and we get fans on from across the country affiliated to different supporters groups. So appreciate any listens.
I would highly recommend checking it out. I listened to one of the episodes. It was great. I would highly recommend Whole Lotta Wolves, and hopefully, Paul, at some point, Robert Plant will come on the podcast. That's my hope.
Thank you. Sounds good.
Okay, my friend. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining me. Before we go, please do subscribe on YouTube and Apple Podcasts to Cottage Talk. It does help other Fulham supporters find us. Okay, well, that's going to do it for this episode of Cottage Talk. For my very special guest, Paul from Whole Lotta Wolves, I'm Russ Goldman. Thank you as always for watching and listening to Cottage Talk, now part of the talkSPORT Fan Network.